Okay. Good afternoon from the UK. My name is Rowan Carandang, and I lead Protivity's global digital identity practice. I hope you and yours are okay under the circumstances, and thank you for joining today's session, Unstructured Data. Who has access to your files? Protecting data outside of the relatively safe application space has always been a challenge. We have a heightened focus on it now due to many rapid deployments of collaboration tools and the associated increase in creation, use, and sharing of data, some of which can be commercially or personally sensitive. I'm joined today by two friends, Belton Flournoy, who leads my team in the UK, and Mark Oldroyd, who leads partner enablement for SailPoint, our strategic partner in access governance. In a moment, I'll do some level setting on the problem and some terminology before handing it off to Belton, who will walk through Protivity's methodology for addressing this challenge, and then Mark, who will walk through a brief demonstration of SailPoint's capability. So why is all this important? Unstructured data continues to grow at phenomenal rates and makes up the bulk of enterprise data. It's probably more of a truism than a fact, but 80% of this data is unstructured, and by 2022, it's estimated that 93% of it will be. Irrespective of the accuracy of that, I think we can all agree that it is a very big majority of data that's growing day by day in our organizations. Most organizations that we work with focus primarily on the protection of their structured data and applications, which is a challenge in itself, but little on unstructured data. So why is this? So from the slide, you can see that approximately 80% of enterprises have very little visibility into their unstructured data. This type of data can quickly become difficult to control unless it's appropriately managed and visible. Controlling access to structured data, the data held in applications and database, on the other hand, can be easier to handle and simpler to manage. We can deploy access management tools to control this access. Controlling access to unstructured data, the data that exists commonly in PowerPoint presentations, Excel files, team folders, and often reports from applications, while difficult, can be business critical. On average, the global cost of a data breach is $3.9 million, and the average cost per record stolen is $150. Those statistics are frightening. However, it's worth mentioning that on the unstructured side of the world, it can just be a single file with very sensitive data that's stolen. And it's often those records that we won't see in big data breach publishings. And that's often because they're not recorded. Given that we've now all moved to a world in which we're now working from home, we're increasingly utilizing collaborative tools such as Microsoft Teams. This will lead to further growth of unstructured data and less central control of it. Before we dive in, it's worth us just going through some terminology. Unstructured data, as this slide implies, is data that is outside of your applications. It's got a life cycle that begins with creation. This is when the data is created or captured. We then have data storage. So once created, data must be stored and protected in accordance with the organization's data classification scheme. We then move to archival and destruction. It's important to highlight that this is a complicated life cycle that can vary across organizations. What we're going to talk through today is how we can provide a multi-threaded attack against these, or multi-threaded defense against losing this data. So unstructured data, again, it's information that does not have a predefined data model, is not organized in a predefined manner. It's typically text-heavy, but can contain other data, such as numbers and images. This results in irregularities and ambiguities that make it difficult to understand using traditional programs as compared to data stored in a field format in databases or annotated in documents. As such, think of unstructured data as the data you hold in PowerPoint presentations, Word documents, Excel files, and PDFs that are then often stored in network file shares or cloud storage solutions such as Google Drive, OneCloud, OneDrive, etc. The question for all of us on this call is, do we know who has access to all these files? And is this access appropriate? Could we give visibility to our senior stakeholders in the organizations on how we are managing access to such business-critical data? Data access governance can assist organizations by giving visibility and enhanced control to all data types, structured, semi-structured, and unstructured. As you can see from the slide, data access governance controls are aimed at protecting data at rest. For data in motion, we tend to think about data loss prevention technologies and cloud access security brokers. In an ideal world, with robust controls, data access governance can act as the first and primary line of defense. Enterprise data access governance controls can protect data before it's in motion. Belton, can you walk us through our delivery?
Yes, thank you very much. Now, I guess firstly, I just wanted to say I recognize that there are a variety of ways that many people can approach this problem. So I'm just going to provide you an overview of one that consistently worked for us, and it's kind of been refined via numerous global discussions that we've had with some of our team members in the US and a few in APAC. So the first step is really to pay attention to understanding the existing landscape and your actually desired outcome. This includes understanding the technology landscape, making sure you pay focus to any existing data classification technologies in place, as well as any existing solutions which can be leveraged to further refine your process. Too often or not, we are going out and purchasing new software that provides a very targeted solution without truly understanding the full capabilities of our existing technologies. One example of this is SailPoint. So if we have anyone on the call who currently uses SailPoint as an identity governance and administration technology, that same technology could easily be extended to cover unstructured data. So it's really, really important that we understand our existing technologies and understand our starting point. Many organizations currently have data labeling mechanisms within the organization to label the data within the organization that use to drive some of their DLP processes. Again, this is where we could understand the inputs that we could use for a project such as this. Another set of inputs that could be considered are GDPR, because we would have done various data mapping activities. And so again, when we start these projects, it's really, really important to understand the lay of the landscape, both from a technology and technology and a process perspective, so you get started with the best foot forward. It is also important to understand at this stage the scope of problem you'd like to achieve and how you'd like to have that phased. I see too many organizations trying to tackle the entire problem at once, as opposed to a structured and phased approach, and which allows for the incorporation of learned lessons as you go. When you clearly define what is in scope and out of scope, you'll be more successful. And if you really, really make sure you do validation phases and expand it across technologies or endpoints in a very structured and deliberate approach, you'll set your program up for success. I can't stress enough, planning is one of the most critical factors for a successful deployment. Once you've identified and documented the project objectives, now is the time you can leverage technology to support in the initial discovery activities. So again, we would have defined the scope of areas, and we would now be using technology to provide us visibility into the problem or the scale of the problem. Now that we can see the data, we want to look to define a model pertaining to how it should be accessed. So again, this really does include understanding how data classification labels should be treated. One example of this is if you have a file that's been labeled as sensitive and it's saved to a public share location, do you want to actually have an alert generated in order for someone to monitor and then work on remediation of that? Or would you prefer to have that file quarantined and automatically kind of removed from that location? So again, you want to try to make sure we're considering what is right based on the different use cases. It's really important that as we move to control unstructured data, we don't inadvertently impact associated processes. So if we do have files we classify as sensitive and we put a blanket rule to quarantine that every time, if there's a batch job that runs and picks up that file from that location, we can break downstream processes without having visibility of it. This is also a really good stage to look at understanding what information can be retired and or removed as it's moved through the organization. As Roland alluded to earlier, and you saw the statistics on the slide, our use of data is increasing exponentially. And if we don't look to implement controls to help manage that, we're increasing our risk of losing potentially sensitive information. This is also a really good area where we could look at the varying level of certification that can apply to various categories. As I mentioned before, it's really important that we don't further complicate the environment and we understand what currently exists versus what we would like to use a technology for. An example of this is Teams. We're all using Teams right now, and Teams gives you the ability and the power to manage users and potentially channels within your organization, and you can share and store and work collaboratively. Now, you could use the native Teams function to essentially push the owners of those teams to certify and review who has access to that. Or alternatively, you could look to decentralize some of the reviews using this type of technology. But again, we don't want to put blanket use cases in when it comes to unstructured data, because things we don't want to do is make people's jobs more difficult than it was before. Once you've defined those controls and the use cases, you move on to the fun bit, or what I find geeks like me find as the fun bit. This is really where you perform the various cleanup activities and you essentially remediate against the controls you set, as well as the functional use cases that you defined before. This is where you can look to implement a variety of workflows, alerts, and certification to ensure that critical data stores have owners and are remediated on a periodic basis or an ongoing basis. One of the things that I find super neat about the SailPoint technology, and I'm sure Mark will allude to this as part of his demonstration, but it provides you with the ability to use something called a crowdsourcing feature. Now, what that allows you to do is you can essentially start with a problem and a huge unknown, and if you actually have no idea who should own some of these file shares or folders or data stores, you can actually use a crowdsourcing technique where it can email the 6 people who have used that file the most over the past 3 months, and it'll essentially send them an alert saying, these 6 people have access to this file or file location. Which one should be the data owner? And then people would essentially vote to determine who should do that. Technologies like this are really cool because it's adding an element of gamification naturally to how we do business, and it's simplifying a process that otherwise would have taken potentially weeks for an analyst to annoy and harass quite a few people to get over the line. Now, depending on if you're using a strategic partner or not, it's important to consider at this stage the depth of remediation. And so as you're looking to remediate the controls, you can, 1, look for a partner to work with you to fully remediate each category before moving to a next, or you can look for the partner to remediate the core use cases, and then you pass it off to your business as usual teams to remediate the tail. It's really, really, really important that you agree up front whether you would like your partner to help with this process, because sometimes you don't know the scale of the problem until you actually perform the discovery exercise, and by that time you're already working with your partner. So it's really, really clear to understand, do you want that to transition to BAU, or would you like your partner to help you with the full end-to-end deployment? The last step is to make sure that the handover is clear, as well as the defined next steps. So some organizations want the end-to-end support, where we help them remediate the full issue prior to progressing. And as I mentioned, others want really help just doing the core use cases before moving the backlog to BAU for them to continue to remediate. Next, now that we have our controls defined across the in-scope data stores, those controls will now be in place and continuously operating based on the criteria we set. So either a periodic assessment of those areas where it runs through those controls, or an ongoing scanning type of methodology to operate. Now, what you want to do is then focus on the next set of areas you want to bring in scope, and then make sure you incorporate those learned lessons. So again, anyone who's doing an unstructured data project, I would never recommend you look to do everything at once, because I guarantee that's going to make it quite difficult with a lot of late nights for you. Now, I wanted to cover some of the key benefits of unstructured data. Obviously, we have quite a few people on the call today, so thank you guys all for joining. And I guess some of the real benefit of effective management of unstructured data is the fact that it forms part of the data access governance controls that Roland had mentioned before. A lot of organizations spend a lot of money, including annual testing of applications, to protect the 20% of enterprise information stored within their structured application assets. Yet, by 2025, 80% of an organization's data is going to be unstructured. So how are we controlling 80% of our organization's information? And while much of that may not be critical, it is critical that we understand the exponential rate that this is coming upon us. And it's really important for us to understand that we can bring this under a layer of control right now. A key benefit of leveraging technology is that it provides organizations with the capability to manage remediation activities in a centralized location. It allows people to apply enterprise-wide controls in a centralized location. It allows us to run certifications over our data in a centralized location. And it simply provides the transparency. And so the great things with these tools is even if you work in audit, these tools are fantastic for you to understand the scale of the problems. You could potentially have findings. And then you could also use it from a security perspective to make sure you're adhering to the security models that set forth by your own organization. This single interface, I can't underestimate as being one of the most beneficial outcomes of this, because it also provides you with the ability to have dashboards and integration with other key areas within an organization. Now, I'm going to quickly talk about our agile delivery method. So both Roland and myself and many others within our firm are what we call Agile Project Management Certified. Now, I always want to clearly let people understand that this is not agile development, this is agile project management. And so what it allows you to do is when you define your milestones, you try to define milestones within a time box. And for many of our large-scale programs, we look to define milestones via monthly deliverable packages. And what that means is as long as we hit the milestones within that month, then we are making good progress, and it allows greater flexibility for moving and adjusting certain activities. So it creates a much more flexible model that increases your ability to meet your deadlines, because the variable component becomes the depth of delivery. And so one example of this is if we are looking at delivering a project and we have 3 endpoints in scope for an unstructured data project, and we want to have it fully deployed, scanned, and commence the remediation activities. If in month 2 we realize we can't get all 3 done, what we can do is we can make a official change request to move one of those endpoints out by a month, and then that allows us to fully meet the other 2 milestones. So when you manage projects in an agile way, it allows you to meet your deadlines in a much more efficient manner because it's easier to package and move things around. And another key element of our agile delivery method is the operating model development. Too often than not, you might work with a partner who helps you on your journey. And then when it ends and it's time for you to take over, you don't know what roles, you don't know who on your team should deliver what. And it makes it really difficult for the organization to manage themselves because they had a consultant partner doing the delivery or helping with the implementation, or they had their technology provider help with the implementation. So operating model development is quite important because this is where you focus on the key controls within your organization and how should they be impacted. When the internal audit perform their audits later in the year, they're pulling through the right thing. Who, from a RACI perspective, needs to be informed, even though they may not be accountable for any of the execution, and other such criteria. And then the last stream that I'd call out is the data enrichment. This is really looking at data within your organization that might act as an hindrance to a wider program. So things like this could be if we are looking at doing certification across unstructured data, what is the authoritative source that we're going to be pulling in identities? And if we have certifications that might deploy through a line manager, do we have effective line manager information within our authoritative source to actually make that statement come to fruition? Because it's great to say we want to implement the line manager certification structure, but if you have contractors and employees in two separate databases and there's no way to easily get that information, it makes it much more difficult. So making sure you break it out into streams and each stream has their own considerations really, really helps with the deployment of a project. Now I'm going to pass back over to Roland, who's going to add a few final touches.
Thank you, Belton. So I think there's a few things I want to build on from Belton's overview there. And I think the main thing to me is the planning component. So in planning, it's so important to consider that this is a very complicated challenge, and there will be multiple tools involved. So like security more generally, I think it's worth pointing out that there is no practical way of preventing all incidents. And if we accept that, which I think we all do, the goal from a control implementation and assurance perspective is really to consider the robustness and defensibility of that control framework. So Belton alluded to a few of the tools there that are often part of this, and I mentioned this briefly in my introduction. We often hear about tagging happening more closely to files, as well as data loss prevention and cloud access security brokers, or CASB products. We feel data access governance is a key component of that architecture and the planning that Belton described. And really this is reflective of that unstructured data lifecycle that I mentioned in the introduction as well. Unstructured data as a process is a largely user-driven process, and it really needs a collection of controls that users manage. It needs controls that users can rely on if that frontline control on tagging wasn't executed properly. And then finally, some controls at the network layer to also allow us to stop incidents when both of those controls fail. On the slide here, you can see a number of different aspects of this. Again, when we think about regulatory compliance and GDPR, these are areas that, again, are incredibly difficult to solve completely, but what we don't want to do is rely completely on regulators to tell us what needs to get done, or audits, for that matter, to do that. So again, architecturally, it's super important for us to really get focused on control objectives, as well as the supporting control framework, and also just focusing on things that we care about and things that we don't. We talked a lot in the earlier slide about how we have so much of this data, but really there's only going to be a small percentage of it that we really, really care about. And I think it's important for us to really think hard about that. And whilst a lot of the data management approaches that we see quite often in the market are what we call bottom-up in nature in terms of just scanning everything, what we really find is that's just impractical from a performance perspective, and also just it's impractical to manage once you find things. Far more effective is probably a hybrid approach, but top-down, thinking about what it is you care about and really allowing users the flexibility to work within sanctioned areas of your environment where we have specific controls in place. It's just too big of a problem to manage completely. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Mark Oldroyd from SailPoint to talk a bit about SailPoint's solution in this space, Identity IQ, File Access Manager.
Great. Thank you, Roland, and thank you, Belton, for that overview of the approach. So as Roland just pointed out, I want to take a few minutes, maybe the next 20, 25 minutes really, and have a look at the SailPoint technology that Protiviti is using to underpin this particular approach around data access governance. Now, the technology, as Roland alluded to there, is actually something called SailPoint Identity IQ File Access Manager. It's a technology that really it's part of a larger offering around general identity governance that actually spans applications, cloud infrastructures, as well as unstructured data. This particular component that we're talking about today has been designed for large-scale unstructured data management and governance in quite complex multi-platform environments. And we'll touch on that a little bit as we go through this discussion. As you'll see, and as we've already heard actually from Belton a few moments ago, there are some unique aspects to File Access Manager. One of the key things that you need to be aware of is its identity-centric nature. Okay, so it's very focused on identities rather than managing at the account level, which is what a lot of technologies in this space have historically done. We're working at the identity level. It also has the ability to devolve much of the responsibility for data governance out to the business people themselves. And there were some discussions about that in the previous slides. So, the intention here is that in order to form this governance framework around data, we need to incorporate or involve people in the business, the line managers, the administrators, and the owners of data. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go through. And as you can see on the slide here, this is one of the first areas that I want to focus on. Now, File Access Manager has a very rich set of functionality. We'll summarize some of the other pieces towards the end of the presentation here. But this is the thing that we're going to have a look at first of all. Now, I don't have a live demonstration. We have a series of screenshots that we're going to take you through. There is a little lag on the slides, so hopefully I can anticipate that as we go through, and you'll get to see all the product functionality. But again, to think about this is a business problem. Managing this huge amount of data traditionally has fallen into the IT arena, and IT have almost been expected to manage this. But really, governance of data, protection of data, minimizing risk of our sensitive information exposure, that's a business problem. And only the business can make decisions to support this kind of regulatory compliance and framework that we've heard about from the guys earlier. One of the things that makes this possible, that you really fundamentally need to think about, is determining the owner of the data. Now, it's critical so that once we have owners, we can use those people to make decisions about access, whether access is appropriate or not, alerting, dealing with violations and things that, again, that Belton raised during his discussion. Identifying owners of data is a key capability of FAM, and something that we want to dig into a little bit more here. And again, this is not easy. When you look at the amount of data involved, huge amounts of unstructured data potentially that's been left very much for the business to self-manage and generate. So quite often we see very high quantities of data. Searching through that, understanding all of that, looking at data classification, etc., again, needs this unique approach. We need data owners in order to help us support this, this approach. Now, I'm just waiting for the screen to switch to the product view. So here we've got just an example of some of the dashboarding and some of the sort of governance information that's available in the tool. So I'm simply showing you one of the dashboards here that's actually highlighting a number of things across our combined storage infrastructure. So File Access Manager is busy monitoring all of these environments. It's as we'll see later, it's understanding and discovering who has access. It's looking at what data is actually held in those environments. It's trying to understand the sensitive nature of data as well. And we'll touch on that a little bit more as we go through the second use case here. Now, we can see from this dashboard here that we've got a number up at the top left. We've got a number of things that are missing data ownership, specifically some sensitive resources that are actually not particularly owned by anyone in the organization. Now, we'll talk through the process where we can actually go ahead and find that data owner in just in a few minutes. But essentially, once we've allocated an owner to the data, and that could be at the folder level or at some other kind of construct or container level, once we've got those ownership rules in place, that actually gives the business access to some quite important information. And as soon as the screen switches here, you'll actually get to see some of that. What we've got on the next slide here is actually a view. There you go. Actually, a view of a particular folder, and this is the kind of view that a business owner would actually get access to. Immediately, that owner can see, first of all, who is accessing their data in this environment. You can see straight away there's a number of users here that are performing various functions, various frequencies, and again, given that immediate view, which is something that is typically quite hard for the business to achieve, I can actually, as a data owner, I can go in and immediately see things that may be inappropriate. I could immediately see people that may be accessing my data. On that screen, I can actually action some changes here. I can remove access and start to alter the access profile of people if it looks inappropriate to me. As we progress through, I'm just waiting for the screen to switch again, we can go a little bit deeper and we can start to look at not only people who have been accessing and playing with our data, but who potentially has access to my folder. So in this case, we're looking at the human resources folder. There are many ways to view this, but we're looking at a tree structure here that actually gives me some significant capability. It tells me about all the direct users, all the groups that have access to my data. The groups are interesting because in many organizations we have nested group constructs in here. So very, very quickly this becomes quite complex to actually manage who has access to your data, given this myriad of interconnected groups and users. We can visualize this very quickly on the screen in File Access Manager. We can also, again, action things directly from this screen. So if there's something on here that I see as a data owner, I can immediately see that perhaps another department has access to my data. I can remove that from here. So this is active remediation of problems before they've even occurred. I've got the ability to actually change all of that data. Now, as we said, all of that access is great. The ability to view the activities, the access permissions, who's got access to my data. There's a lot of other things on here as well. I can set alerts, and the system will tell me when certain activities happen, like new content being created, for example. So there's lots of things additionally I can do. But this all really relies on this concept of data ownership. I want the business people to come in and make these decisions for me. On the next screen that you'll see is actually the ownership view of that particular page, that particular folder that we've been looking at. What you can see right now is actually a view of the current owners on the right-hand side, the people that are currently determined as owners for the HR folder. on the left-hand side, you can also see a view of, again, the activity. Who are the most common accessors of this particular data? Now, historically, again, there have been a lot of technologies in this space that have attempted to identify data owners. Quite often, that has been done using activity-based information. So maybe the most active user becomes the data owner. The manager of the most active team becomes the data owner. That could be quite inappropriate depending on the activity that's happening underneath all of this. It may not be appropriate access that we're modeling the ownership on. So what we're doing here is we're actually starting to understand this in a little bit more of a sensible way. And Belton mentioned this using something called owner election or crowdsourcing. Again, this is one of the key fundamental aspects of the technology. If we switch to another view, so I actually move, again, the slide should change in a second. If I move to an end user view of File Access Manager, so this is somebody who happens to be a data owner. They can interact with File Access Manager. They can look at their own folders that they own. In this case, the human resources folder, you can see Michelle Perez was one of the owners. This is actually the browser of Michelle Perez. So all she can see on here is information pertinent to the human resources folder. She also has under her tasks, she's got a couple of tasks there in terms of owner election. So what that means is the system is actually asking for Michelle's help to help us identify the owner of some other folder. Nothing to do with her ownership currently, but she is a user of data, and that data is under scrutiny to identify who the current owner is. So again, as soon as the screen switches, you'll see what we're doing here. When Michelle selects that action to complete that owner election process, we actually show her a set of information related to this particular process that we're running. What it will do, it will show her the folder that we're interested in. At the top of the screen there, you can see this is the folder, the project internal audit is what we're trying to identify the owner of. So that is listed there for Michelle. The next element that we're going to show her is down on the left-hand side there. We've actually got a list of files, and again, Belton touched on this in the earlier discussion. This is adding context to the business interaction here. I may not remember that particular folder, but I probably will remember some of those files and data items that I regularly touch. That will help me to visualize, exactly what data are we talking about, and what is it that we're trying to find the ownership of. Again, in the center of the screen, we're actually starting to show basically the users that File Access Manager is suggesting could be owners of this data, and that is based on activity and a number of other algorithms. But it's showing up some examples here of people who might potentially be the owner, and this is a voting process. All I need to do now is select which one of those users is actually the business owner. Now, this is something that this information is not necessarily available to IT. This is operational business knowledge. If I'm using that information, there's a high likelihood that I actually understand in the organizational context who is the owner of this data. So I can choose any of those people. It may be that those owners don't actually touch the data. They are responsible for it, but they never interact directly with the data. So, and you see here on the right, there's the ability to suggest another user and actually go through and highlight somebody who maybe isn't on the list. And again, this is information that is part of the business operational view and would be very hard for IT to understand. At the end of that process, I'll just let the screen catch up a little bit there. At the end of that process, I can select different users. I can actually go through and add people to this list, and then eventually commit commit that decision, and that will actually submit my vote effectively. So we're running through this process, and this is how we, effectively why we call it the crowdsourcing element. We're actually going out and asking the business who they believe is the rightful owner of this data. We collect all that information, and again, I'll just let the screen catch up here. This is the end of the process. Really, is actually to show us the current goal here, and you can see from the results, if it moves across, you can see from the results here that we're actually we're looking at a potential different owner here, Jerry Bennett. So that was voted by my particular process, but other people could have been voting as well. At the end of that process, we'll get a clear indication from the business who the end user is, who the owner is, and we can then interact them and bring them into that ownership process. They then get access to all of the information we've seen previously about who's got access to the data, who is actively touching the data, etc. And they can start to get involved in those processes. That moves us on to the next kind of part of the feature set, which is really around addressing directly those compliance and audit requirements that we see. Enforcing policies, looking at access, what is appropriate, what is inappropriate, dealing with violations to those rules. Again, that is something that the owners can be absolutely involved in. We can talk a little bit about identifying sensitive data. We've touched on that through the discussion, and Belton and Roland mentioned that several times. Again, we have some unique ways that we use around that, and a number of other things as well. There's a lot of reporting and compliance dashboarding in here that actually helps get organizations to that level of governance that they're looking for. Now, again, I've got a few screenshots here just to show you a few things, a few examples on here. Again, when the screen changes over, you'll actually see one of the alert dashboards within the tool. So the tool has the ability to generate these policies. You can define these policies within the environment. Now, policy can be used to check a whole host of things. It is primarily designed to look for inappropriate access across your data. Now, what you deem as inappropriate access is effectively what you put into these policies here. The example we're just about to dig into is something called file server non-HR access to HR. Now, that's a bit cryptic, but it's effectively saying, monitor my HR data folders and tell me when someone accesses that data who actually physically doesn't sit in the HR team. So these are non-HR users accessing HR data. Now, we know that information from the rest of the governance platform that gives us a significant amount of identity data about these users. We know the departments people work in. We understand the identities of those people. So we can make these kind of checks that you see on here. And we've actually dug into that policy in a little bit more detail on the screen now. You can see that it's specifically focused on a certain area of the storage. So in this case, we're just looking at the particular Windows Server area, and we can limit the files that this is looking at in the folders. It has a filter on there. It's basically filtering all the activities we collect and looking for people who have an incorrect department number. And then finally, there's some sections down here that talk about, is this a single trigger or is this happening multiple times in a certain time period? And then finally, what do we do about it? Do we simply notify the data owner, or do we trigger some other kind of action and remediation process? So again, we can fire off workflows, we can remove access, we could quarantine the data. There's lots of things that we could do at that point that's very customizable. Again, if we then switch, so that really gives us a view of the policies. You can define as many policies as you like, pointing at various different aspects of your data. The classification that we mentioned, again, works on a very similar way. You'll see the screen in a second looks very, very similar to what we saw in the policy engine. It literally provides a whole series of data classification rules. Now, many of these are actually built into the product. And you see here, we're going to have a look at PCI data. A lot of these are pre-existing. You can build your own. There are numerous types of policy in here. But just to understand what this is actually doing, it is really digging into the content of the files. So what it actually does is it effectively runs background activities continuously, and it is going in. It is essentially reading these files, taking the content. It doesn't physically make a new copy of these data files. It actually brings it into memory, and it scans through the content, and it's looking for particular occurrences of data. Now, many of the classification or labeling tools out there rely on the user to actually specify, what classification the data is carrying. In this case, we're actually scanning the content itself. We're looking for patterns. We're looking for wildcards of data. We're looking for expressions or, for example, credit cards and those kind of things. Again, you can put in all of your own policies, whatever you want to program in here. This one, for example, is looking for American Express cards. It will even do that visually by scanning images if that's something that you want to apply. The violations that are created from those events, those classifications, sorry, not violations, the classifications that are created from those rules actually are then applied to the documents, and we store all of that information. We can then pull out reports. We can query the data. We can look at that classified data and actually who's got access to that information. So that again is another use case. Something else I just wanted to touch on at the end of this. Again, there was a discussion about this from Belton and Roland. When we move to governance and control of data access, one of the tools we use quite often is this regular certification or review of access. So again, if you are a data owner, we will probably begin to ask you on a regular basis to review who has access to your data, what access do they have, can they see sensitive information, etc. And this is actually something, again, that we push out as activities, as tasks to the end users, primarily data owners, but it doesn't have to be data owners. And in this case, when the screen refreshes, you'll see that this user has a number of, in fact, 5 certifications that we want to run. Now, we're going to pick one of those certifications and actually move through, and hopefully the screen will show us that quite quickly. Now, when we go in and we look at a certification, again, you should see that in a few seconds. Effectively, a certification is listing all of the current users who have access to this particular data, whatever the target of the certification happens to be. And you'll see, hopefully when the screen changes here, you'll see that the decision-making process we actually have is that we need to go through all of these access points line by line, understand that particular user, their business context, the role they play within the organization, and whether we should approve or reject that access. So this is a regular review process that we actually want to go through. So again, that's a manual process. The data owner has to go through and make those approve or reject decisions. Now, there are tools in here to make this a little bit easier. Quite often, you may see patterns in this access. So, for example, lots of people from a particular department, which we think that access is appropriate for that department to see this data. So instead of going through line by line, we actually have this ability to do what we call the chart view. And again, you should see that in a few seconds now. So as a reviewer, I can actually change the way this is displayed. In this case, we're now showing the chart view I can break this out and basically by department, and I can actually go in and approve an entire department in one go. Now again, this is all based on identity data. This is not just based on the fact that we're managing, basic domain accounts. We actually understand who these people are, what role they play in the business, and therefore we can do this kind of identity-centric management of these users. And then finally, I think the last screen that you're going to see is really just back to some of the dashboarding again. There's a lot of components and technology required in here to manage things like the classification engine to make sure we are classifying appropriately, we're catching all the data. There are workflow tools in here to make sure that things like these review campaigns are actually running, and everything is running smoothly for the end users. So a number of other features there. That's kind of the last screenshot that we're going to see. There is a lot of capability within the File Access Manager product that we haven't really looked at. It's a very comprehensive user interface, and it does integrate particularly well with some of the other solutions from SailPoint that are more focused around application access. So I just want to finish on the last slide, hopefully when you see that in a second. So a quick functional summary. We've touched on a lot of this, and this aligns very well with the approach that Belton and Roland just talked about. We effectively have a 4-stage process that we use to apply this technology into an organization. We start with the visibility, the discovery, understanding the permissions and who's got access and who's touching the data. We overlay that with identity information and enrich the data we're collecting with identity attributes. And then we move on to applying control and compliance and finally active remediation pieces. And we've touched on a lot of that through the demonstration that we just looked at. So I think we've spent a little bit of time on there. That kind of ran through. Hopefully you got to see all the screens there. It was running a little bit slow, but hopefully you got to see some of the user interface, and hopefully you recognized the usability and the sort of concepts around getting the business involved in all of this. It's critical that the business is actually empowered to help manage and govern this kind of information. And again, hopefully you saw how this technology can fit very well into the approaches that Protiviti were just talking about.
Great. Thank you so much for your time there, Mark, and the insight into the product. Belton, can you tell us if there are any questions from our attendees? Just make sure you come off mute if you are.
There's one, and it's probably around how long is the typical implementation for one of these technologies?
Okay. I think, sorry, Roland, did you want to have a go at that?
Yeah, so I think there's it's a good question, and I think the important thing to mention is it's a very complicated problem. It doesn't mean it needs to have a 3-year time to value against it. It likely is a multi-year program, but in partnership with SailPoint, we've deployed in 3 months. And that's because of the framework that Belton showed before, the Agile PM methodology that we use, and just through a deep knowledge and partnership with SailPoint, being able to deconstruct their solution and present that back and get agreement with our stakeholders on the right order of building out what's a fairly complex, I refer to as a puzzle box cover, just so people are aware of everything that we are doing quarter by quarter and what we're doing in future periods. So I think there is a fast time to value on this, but I want to make sure people recognize it is likely a multi-year program in most cases.
There is another question, and this is, how does this integrate with IIQ?
Okay, so yeah, I'll take that one. So yeah, File Access Manager is actually part of the IdentityIQ product offering right now. Previously, it was a product in its own right. We've rebranded it and fitted it into that particular platform. It does integrate particularly well. In the very latest release, we've got some very deep integrations. So we have, for example, the ability to share the classification information. We can push that across into the application governance tools as well. So when we're doing things like more holistic access reviews across the entire organization, or we're supporting self-service access requests, for example, we can actually highlight that the entitlement that you're requesting will actually give you access to sensitive data. Ultimately, it is a gateway. It's an opener to accessing some of this sensitive data. So there's a lot of integration like that. We've got integration at the user interface level as well, so people can flow between the two products quite easily, really to make that a seamless piece. And again, there are lots of integration use cases that we can talk about. Someone leaves the organization, they happen to be a data owner. We actually want the rest of the IdentityIQ offering to recognize that data owner is leaving and help us to identify a new data owner, for example. So a lot of that functionality is already there in the product, and there are lots more things planned around that as well.
Perfect. And there's one last question that I'll try to answer in the last minute. How would I be able to get buy-in from an organization if I believe there is a problem? So I guess one of the routes that is feasible to do is a proof of concept. If you're in the audit function, you can potentially partner and try to run an audit leveraging technology like this. What it will essentially provide you with is the scale of the problem, so then you actually have ammunition to have conversations about. Sometimes when you try to embark on a journey, it's speaking about the what if, and being able to do a proof of concept really adds some value and credence to that. I know we're at time yet, so Mark, I'll give you one last question if you can answer it in 30 seconds. How does this technology work in the cloud?
Absolutely. It can be absolutely be hosted in the cloud or on-premise, depending how you want to do this. It's fully supported on all the major cloud platforms. So absolutely, yes. Perfect.
So thanks everyone for calling in. This webinar will be made on demand if some of you joined late, or if you joined earlier, you wanted to share it with your colleagues, and it would be sent out shortly. And if anyone did want to reach out, please do let any of us know. We will be sending an email out thanking everyone for attending, and we will be including the contact information for both Roland, myself, and Mark. Thank you all again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Belton. Thank you, everyone.